Okay, so my cat just walked over the keyboard and stopped the recording, so I'll try this again. Today I would like to talk about character motivation and motivation at the gaming table, motivation in role-playing games. And I would say that a lot of people have been debating what is the perfect plot hook, how can I suck the characters of my players in, blah, 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 blah. And I take a very, very ambivalent approach to this, and I've got a very ambivalent view of this, because let's face it, the characters don't exist. The characters are the imaginary friends of the players. If the players are not motivated to play a game, no matter what their characters think or we believe that their characters think or feel, you won't be able to play. So I also think that, and I come from an old school background in that way, that I don't need to be lured in. My character doesn't need to be lured in to a story. I need to like the setting, which is why I would never play steampunk, because the settings are just totally ridiculous. Or I don't play fantasy with dinosaurs in it, because that's also totally ridiculous. But beyond that, anything that goes into motivation of the character is secondary. I need to be motivated as a player first. And here we also have to take a step back and take this to a meta level. When people engage in the act of role-playing, usually they are not forced to do so. Although there are players who are forced to do so. It's the famous girlfriend that's been brought to the table. And that's apparently even a real thing. And interestingly enough, it's mainly a girlfriend that people talk about, never a boyfriend. But, you know, I guess a partner could always get sucked in and put at the table simply because the other partner wants to play, and then they're sitting there and it's all terrible for them. And they are not motivated themselves, so why should their character care? So they're a lost cause anyway. But let's face it, especially when you're playing with grown-ups, they have assembled at the table or online to create something together. So I do expect the players to also kind of go, I will put myself behind it, and I will find within my character a way to make a certain story relevant to me. And I think in the old days, and I think D&D never really left the old days, nor did Pathfinder, because they don't really have a meta plot. They don't really have a living history, but every single campaign is a single campaign onto its own. You know, they're never connected. You basically create a character at the beginning of the campaign, because every character starts at level 1 or 0, or whatever the lowest is, at the beginning of the campaign. And you kind of try to build characters that make sense for that particular campaign. And this whole idea of everybody needs a motivation to be there is totally put in the bin in the Ravenloft scenario, where there is no reason why people go to Ravenloft. You can't actually go to Ravenloft. Ravenloft sucks you in, and you could be anyone. You just end up in the mists, and then you wake up and you're in Ravenloft. And that's it. So that is essentially how they try to motivate characters. They don't. They just put them into the situation and then go, okay, well, now find your way out. You know, if you don't do anything, you'll just sit there and you'll die, because everybody around you, most people are soulless. They don't care about you. You have no friends. You have no relationships that you can form, because these people are all crazy people. So, you know, you're on your own. And I think also the old DSA adventures, Das Schwarze Auge, let's concentrate on that one, operate pretty much on the same premise. You know, like Das Grabmal von Briglow. You don't need to have a big motivation. You know, you're put there and you want to, you are supposed to go into a dungeon and explore it. It's also the first dungeon adventure that was ever written for Das Schwarze Auge. Or the Orkland trilogy, where you just go and explore the Orkland. Why do you go there? Well, you know, one reason is because you're adventurous and you want to see the world. That's a very good motivation. So to me as a player, quite often, when I join a round, I'm like, okay, so what are we playing? What are we looking at? Okay, so and I joined a group recently, and I said, okay, well, what would you like me to play? And they said, well, have you got a character? And I said, yes, I do. I have a a Rondra disciple. And they were like, really? I said, yeah. 11, I don't know how many points she had, 1150, I believe. It's like, okay, can you upskill her to 1175? And I said, yeah, no problem. Because that actually fits really well. If they had said, okay, we already have a Rondra a disciple, or we actually don't need a disciple at all. We need, let's say, a rogue. I would have said, okay, I can build a rogue. It's not a problem. And I can then start inhabiting that character. Because I'm able, as the creator, or as Tolkien would say, the sub-creator, to build a character based on a premise and then fill it with life. But at the very beginning, the story has to come first and my will to play. And then, I think, is the turning point. And the turning point happens once you are in the story, because then you have to find out what motivates your character in a particular situation. Not what motivates your character to play or to be part of the story to begin with, because you are already in the story, but from scene to scene, how would your character react? What would be your character's reaction to a certain situation? And that can be, for example, my Rondra disciple is currently traveling with people who've got 2 prisoners, and they really want to kill them. At least one of them wants to kill them. But of course, she's a Rondra disciple. She cannot let this happen. She is, regardless of if they are evil, regardless of if they are criminals, they need to be brought to justice, no question. But killing them is not an option. So she's constantly in this conflict. Well, I don't want to call it conflict because it's not like there is big conflict. With the group saying, no, we're not going to do this. No, we can't do this. This is her motivation. She's motivated by her church, by the teachings of her church, by what her church considers appropriate behavior towards people who are in your custody as a prisoner. You can't just kill them. You can make sure that they get tried. And if then in the trial it is found that they need to be put to death, you will be the first to do it. You don't have a problem with that because you're abiding by the law. But you cannot just go and kill people, especially if they're unarmed. It doesn't work this way. So her motivation here is to keep them alive. And one of them is actually from the Schwarze Lande, from Transilia, and he's a very evil person. He's probably got some demonic pact going, which is completely anathema to her, both as a disciple of a god, but also as a disciple of Rondra, because he has actually killed women and children. That's part of the story, and you find that out as you go along. So he's completely anathema to her. But at the same time, she is bound by the code of her church, and that's her motivation. And then we have a dwarf who is really in big trouble because we're traveling through country that is full of dragons, but we have been told not to, and he has been told by a very, very ancient dwarf not to touch the dragons because there's an understanding between dragons and humans, and that extends to the dwarves, that they are not to be harmed because they are also not going to harm them. So he's really suffering because it is in the dwarves' nature to kill dragons because they are ancient enemies. So he's constantly fighting this. He's constantly trying to suppress his motivation, which is, I'm a dwarf and all dragons must die. Because he's also bound by the task that was given him by this ancient dwarf saying, you have to travel to this place and meet with, of all things, a dragon to sort out this mess. So for him, this is a really, really big problem. And here you see the motivation coming. You know, in every single scene where we have dragons, he has to overcome this every single time. And that's where the role-playing aspect comes in. But, you know, it's not like, oh, why am I motivated to go on the journey in the first place? Because it is one of those independent stories. It gets different and very different once you play one of those campaigns that actually have an impact on the meta plot. And here I would like to select the Bornland Kampagne, which is a 6-parter, and which you really cannot play with just any old character. You really need characters that are somehow invested in the Bornland. It can be all kinds of different types of investment. You know, it doesn't have to be that they're natives of the Bornland. It doesn't have to be like this, but you have to have a reason to care. It is a very parochial story because it really is only centered around the Bornland, at least for the first, I want to say, 2 or 3 adventures, where you don't really see why this has any impact beyond the Bornland proper. And I don't want to give away too much, but, you know, if you don't like goblins, or if you are not interested in what happens in Festum, if you're not invested in the Bornland, you cannot play this. You can play this with characters who may not be from the Bornland, but who are, for example, disciples of Rondra. And I'm coming back to my Rondra disciple because I created her for that purpose. Because of the Theatre Knights that basically colonized the Bornland and formed it into what it is today before they were killed 700 years ago. But, you know, she would, or any Rondra disciple would have a reason to go there, would have a reason to explore. They might even then get sucked into the whole plot that is going on there, and it would mean something to them. But with the group that I'm playing on offline, they have no chance in hell of actually going through that campaign because they are completely not able to engage with anything that's going on. And that's what I see at the table, because they just take it as oh yeah, there's a task that we need to fulfill. Okay, there's another task. So it's really old school D&D. I don't care why there's a dragon in this cavern. Let's just kill it and move on. But that's not how you play DSA, and that's especially not how you play a DSA campaign. So in those cases, I would say, and I would revise what I used to think, because I come from DSA 1 where there wasn't that much of a campaign going, and there wasn't that much of a meta plot, and also we were all children, so we didn't really think about it. We just wanted to have fun. And so, of course, there wasn't that much going on there. But now at 45 and with all the wealth of Aventuria as we have it today, I would say that there are reasons why you need motivation. There are reasons why people need to understand that you can't just take any old character anywhere in Aventuria to play adventures or to play a campaign, because it doesn't work like this. It is a fully fledged, fully developed world. So, for example, I'm about to embark on a quite a long campaign with a group, and there are a couple of rules. Number one is we can't have any dwarves in the campaign, because the campaign will take them to the sea, which they will cross and hopefully survive the crossing. But dwarves in DSA have the myth that they were created by a god called Angrosh, and that he kindled an eternal flame inside of them. That's, if you will, their soul. And if they are in water or on water, this will be extinguished and they will die. So if you're planning a sea journey of several months, you can't have a dwarf in your party because it won't work. He will die. You will have to make him die. It doesn't work. You know, you can't really metagame this. He will be gone. But then also the question is, and I happen to know what's going to happen, and I also happen to know what kind of plot hooks there are that make sense for this particular campaign. So I'm also telling people, you know, I'm looking for this type of character, because I know that they will have a stake in it. Whether you want to play that character is now secondary. If you don't want to play that character, and I have a list of characters that you can choose from, if none of them suit you, then it doesn't make sense for you to join the campaign, because you will not be... It will be impossible for me to drag in your character in such a way that your character actually feels they're contributing, and then by extension you feel you're contributing. And I think this is also something where you as a GM have to lay down the law, as it were. And if somebody says, oh yeah, but I don't want to create a new character because, I've got this one and it took me a day or two to create, well, then you can't play. And I think this is where I see also the job of the players. First of all, you have to agree on the fact that you're all playing a game and you're all going to play it together. That's number one. But it's not just for the GM to sit there and come up and try to bring everyone in. It's also the job of the players to let themselves be brought in and let their characters be brought in. And that by extension means they need to create characters that can be brought in. But that may also mean that over the course of, let's say, 2 years playing DSA, you may have 3 or 4 characters because you're playing different areas and you're playing in different areas of the world. You're playing different campaigns. You're playing different settings, and you cannot just regurgitate your character. And one thing that DSA is not, it's not a power gamer game. We just basically keep leveling up, leveling up, leveling up, leveling up. You don't. At some point, there isn't anything you can do anymore. It's not like, I don't know, World of Warcraft, where you end up with, I don't know, what is it, level 80 at this stage? I don't know. Or Skyrim, where you just keep leveling up. No, that's not what this is about. It's a very different game. It's a role-playing game. Everything else is a power gamer game. And I'm not putting down the power gamers. I just, when you look at Pathfinder, for example, or D&D, and people have very high-level characters, what are you going to do with them? That's almost superhero status. And superheroes are something that is really stupid. I mean, I've never gotten the concept. I think it's actually quite ridiculous. I don't want to use the word childish because I know plenty of grown-ups who are into superheroes, but that's just not a concept. That's, there is no merit in someone who is all-powerful. And everything, I mean, I've watched several movies that deal with superheroes. Every conflict is totally forced and pasted on. I mean, there is no conflict, really. It's like, what is the biggest conflict in the life of Ares? It's the fact that his wife has been cheating on him. Whereas he, being a male god, could cheat on his wife and nobody cared. That's his biggest conflict, really. And the fact that Athena is smarter than him and he can't actually accept it. Big deal. Because he's omnipotent. He's a god. The people who really have conflicts are the human heroes of the Iliad. They have conflicts, inner turmoil, and extrinsic conflicts that really ring true 2,500 years after, or almost 3,000 years after the story was written down. But they're not superheroes. Superheroes are more like gods, and they don't have conflicts because they don't die. Because they are almost omnipotent. I'm not sure if superheroes, I think, isn't it Clark Kent, Superman, who can be killed by kryptonite? Yeah, so just stay away from kryptonite and you'll be fine. But, I digress. So essentially, I think that character motivation can be important at the beginning if you know already where your characters will be going. If you plan on just playing single adventures or one-shots, then character motivation is pretty much optional because you don't know from game to game what kind of a game you will be playing. So there it's really the fact that the player themselves has to say, yes, I'm going to be motivated, and yes, I'm going to make this adventure work for my character. When you're playing a longer campaign, or when you're playing in a particular region, this whole idea of your character having a motivation and a reason for being there is much more important. But at the same time, it is still the player's job to ensure that from scene to scene where your character is being played to, you search your character's soul, as it were, and think, with his background, with her story, with the kind of character she's playing, with the kind of skills he has, what would be the appropriate reaction or action? And interestingly enough, I haven't mentioned a single plot hook in this. because if all of this falls into place, you don't need hooks. Because I always find the term plot hook really annoying, because it's almost like we're fish, we're just swimming in the ocean, and then we see this big juicy worm and we just latch onto it and then we get pulled out. That's not how I want to play a game, because that's completely chance. If I don't see the plot hook, I will swim right past it. Or if I happen to be not interested in worms today, but I would like to eat something else, then I don't see it either. I don't eat it either. To me, this idea of a plot hook is way too random. And that's actually all from me for today. And I wish you all a pleasant rest of the day. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.